Hey guys, I'm in a little early, but I'm gonna share my screen so that you guys can start seeing everything, get everything set up. And if you guys could go to, I'm thinking everyone go to mute, and then as we have questions throughout this entire presentation, we can just maybe raise the hand or just call out, I guess, at some point. This is my first time doing the Zoom with you guys, so it might be a work in process, but hang in there with me.
Hi.
There, hey, how you doing? I'm trying to see it. Sorry guys, I haven't used. I'm trying to find the participants, how to see all you guys. There we go. All right, guys, we'll get started. For everyone hopping in, we'll get started in couple minutes. If there's any questions that you guys had before that you guys want me to answer, go ahead and let me know now, so I can kind of cover those as I walk through the slides. I have 22 slides I want to go over. I'm thinking 25 to 30 minutes or so from a presentation perspective, and then open it up for Q&A, maybe a 20 to 30 minute as well. And are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I need to move this thing out of the way so you guys can see. There we go. Is that me drawing on the screen, or is that you guys?
Oh, that would be you.
Rookie mistake. So ignore the red lines that I have all over the screen, the green lines that you guys are probably seeing right now. And for all of you guys that don't know me, by the way, I'm going to do a quick introduction. So, my name is Brennan Schlagbaum. So I go by the name of BudgetDog on Instagram. So you guys probably see me on Instagram or Twitter or something, or ran into me once or twice. But if you aren't following me over there, go ahead and follow me, because I do lives like this kind of thing all the time. And I love to work with you guys, work with people. So Wall Squad has been an absolute blessing to me to be able to help you guys on another level. So make sure you guys take advantage of that and my resources that I offer. I do, you know, I have a free budget template that's sitting in my link in my bio. So if you guys need stuff like that, all of that stuff is free. I'll answer all the DMs. If you guys ever have questions, just run stuff by me. I typically try to voice message you guys, so it's more personal and you guys get a pretty good understanding of the question asked and stuff. But I just want to make sure everyone knows that. All right, guys.
Zoom meeting with the investor.
So it said I can't see your screen. You guys can see it, correct?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. All right. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. It's 8:30, so we should be good. If anything comes up during this presentation that you guys have questions on, feel free to shoot me a message over here in this chat box so that I can see it. And then I'll try to stop where I can and kind of explain things to you as best as possible. So let's start on slide 1. So this is going to be a stock market overall wealth building type of course. I've focused in on a lot of things where I don't try to get rich quick. I do this through the long term, and I try to make this as easy as possible and as little effort on my end as possible as well. Just with a little bit of education, you can kind of set your life up like that, and that's what I'm trying to portray through my Instagram page, through Wealth Squad, through all this stuff. So let's get started. The very, very first thing that I like to talk about are the only three things that I think anybody ever needs to do to be wealthy. And that's hard to say, but when it comes to the investing game, it's not as hard as people think it actually is. So I talk about number one, buying low cost index funds. I am a big index fund investor. I talk about it all the time. And so if you guys know the Wealth Dad as well, Sean, he talks about low cost index funds and has a book on this as well that goes into great detail. But essentially what these are, for those that don't know, are this is a group of an asset class, let's say stocks, for example, that are tracking an index being, for example, maybe the S&P 500 you guys have heard of. Maybe it's a tech sector ETF or index fund / ETF here. So it's not just index funds. ETFs I'm a big fan of those as well. But what these do essentially is they are the market. So if you buy into these, you are the market. You're going to get market returns. You're not going to get much better than them. You're not going to get worse, but you're going to play it safe, and you're going to, over the long term, you're going to have a pretty promising return with these. And so when I say low cost people a lot of times they think it's the price. The low cost is actually the expense ratio. So every one of these funds come with what's called an expense ratio, and those expense ratios are basically the cost of the fund, and these are basically going to the fund manager, whoever is in charge of them. The reason why these are low cost is because there is not really a fund manager that actually pays attention and keeps up with this, because it's actually the market. They don't have to buy and trade and hold all the time. It's just pretty self-explanatory. The fund manager will buy. These costs can range from literally zero. There are some really good index funds out at Fidelity, like FZ Rocks. That's actually a 0% expense ratio, but like most of them are like 0.04, so 4 basis points. And that's essentially free. I mean, you're not paying hardly anything. And a lot of times investing gets bogged down with fees, and that's what crushes investors, which is why I love talking about the low cost index funds. Second bullet point here is dollar cost averaging. So there's two ways to invest. You can either lump sum or you can dollar cost average. Lump summing, obviously, you're putting all your money in right away in a big lump sum. Dollar cost averaging, the fancy term, is basically you're taking your money and you're averaging it over let's say a year, right? So you get paid every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks you decide to invest into a low cost S&P 500 index fund. And then so we'll walk through an example in a second to talk about dollar cost averaging, but it's fascinating what it does. And you're really basically, minimizing your risk by doing this, because you're not buying the asset price all at once when it could be up or it could be down. You're just taking the averages over the long term. And we'll walk through an example here shortly. The third one is invest, invest, invest. And I know that sounds very obvious, but a lot of people don't. So I want to take you to the wealth triangle. So right here, we have the wealth triangle. So the three biggest factors for long-term wealth when it comes to investing is time, amount invested, and asset percent return. Time, guys, if you guys are young, 20, 30 years old, even 40, you guys have time on your side when it comes to the investing game. And that's where compound interest comes into play. If you're able to just have your money in the market for a long period of time, it doesn't matter if you have $5 in there or $3 million in there. You're going to gain compound interest by keeping your money and letting it compound over time. And so it's an amazing way to do things, right? Second, amount invested. So amount invested is obviously on you. I recommend 15% of your gross annual income to retirement. And then on top of that, for non-retirement, it depends. Everybody's situation is different, but I advise you guys to get a budget just so that you guys know how much you can invest. But I say the more the better. You can't go wrong with investing. If you're investing 50%, I think you're doing pretty well, right? But don't feel like you have to go over that 15% mark. I think 15% is a really, really good base that's going to protect you over the long term, and it's going to make sure that you're wealthy when retirement comes around. and you're really focused in on quitting your job or doing whatever you want at that point. And that time, that time can come sooner if you use like a brokerage account to do an early retirement. I love the idea of that. So that's also there. And then the last one's asset percent return. So asset percent return is simply the return that you're getting on the investments that you're buying. And like I said, with the low cost index funds, you're probably going to get about 8 to 12%. Historically, the S&P 500 since 1926, which is inception, has been 10%, a little north of 10%. So if that tells you anything, how simple this actually has to be, it's all right here in what I call the wealth triangle. So I like to bring this up. This is a really good little study that JP Morgan did, a 20-year study. So this talks about, timing the market. So people are in and out of the market all the time, trying to time it, trying to figure out, hey, I want to get the best returns. This stock dropped, that stock is rising. What can I do to time the market? Well, what I'm going to tell you here is don't try it. Don't even waste your time, because it takes a ton of time. And most of us have day jobs. Most of us have families, other things we just want to do, right? And we don't want to sit here and stare at the computer all day and worry, hey, is my stock up? Is it down? All that kind of stuff. We just want to put our money in the market and have great returns. So over a 20-year period, 97 to 2016, S&P returned 8.2% with compounding interest. So based on the rule of 72, your money is doubling every 9 years in this situation. However, look over here on the right-hand side. And I apologize for the blue and red. I don't know how to get rid of that. But if you miss the 10 best days in a 20-year period, so remember, the market drops a lot, but it also rebounds really fast, and you just don't know when that's going to happen. A 4.5% return compared to an 8.2% return if you miss the 10 best days. So that's literally split in half. If you miss the 20 best days in a 20-year period, remember, your return's about a 2%. And then if you miss the 30 best days, well, you end up losing money. And so a lot of people want to chase returns because they want to get those huge returns. And I'm not saying you can't get it with different strategies, but if you just let your money sit, you're going to be really successful with this strategy. So like I said, buying and holding is the way to go. So here we go with compound interest example. So we have Denise and Oscar in this little example here. So they both are going to invest in a Roth IRA, and they both get that 10% return I was talking about during their investment life. So this is how important time is, guys. So from 18 to 27, Denise does not invest anything. From 27 to 65, though, she invests $1,000 per year. On the other hand, Oscar invests $1,000 per year from 18 to 27, so just a few years. But after 27, he says, no, I'm not going to invest. I'm done, whatever. So you guys can already think forward of how it's going to play out here. So while Oscar only invested $9,000, he's going to have $630,000 at age 65. And then on the other hand, Denise, so she invested $38,000, way more than Oscar, but she's only going to have $428,000 because of when they started. So one of the things I always talk to parents about when I do wealth planning calls and stuff is open a Roth IRA for your children. There's ways to build wealth for your kids and to kind of change the family tree. It doesn't matter if it's $200 or $100 a year, or 2 years. You know what I mean? Like, just try to get some money in there for a child at a young age, to start this process, and kind of not only to start the process for them monetarily, but also to get them in that mindset so that they know, hey, like, okay, I'm supposed to do this, because not all of us were given parents that told us what to do with money. Like I can tell you mine didn't. When I was 18 years old, I had no idea what a Roth IRA was. So if I would have known that, I could have been Oscar in this situation, versus where Denise is technically investing more of her own money, but compound interest isn't working in her favor as much so as Oscar is. So next bullet point I want to talk about is dollar cost averaging. So this is the example I want to talk to you guys about a little bit more in detail so you guys can understand kind of what I'm talking about. So here is an example.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah, what's up?
They want you to press play from current slide because they can't read this on their phones and stuff.
Oh, I apologize. Yep. There we go. Is that better?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Awesome. Sorry, guys. All right. So right here, dollar cost averaging. So when you guys think about dollar cost averaging, just think about a periodic set of, it sounds fancy, but it's really not. Every paycheck you have, you make $2,000. Well, of that paycheck, you put 10% to retirement, and that's $200 per paycheck. So it's just a set automatic schedule that you've set out throughout the year. So in this situation, the investor decides to set up automatic contributions on the first of each month for $500. He purchases during this time 4.25 shares. So that's the combination of these 3 months right here, 2 plus 1 plus 1.25 for $1,500 for an average share price of $352.94. So the average share price during that time was actually $383 right here. However, the investor was able to buy his amount of shares for just $352 or $30 per share less on a per share basis because of how he set this up. So as you can see here, monthly investment amount, there's, $500 month 1, month 2, month 3. He's just consistently saying, hey, I want to max out maybe, let's say an IRA for $6,000 a year, divided by 12 months, so $500 a month. He's buying, let's say, the S&P 500. Well, the first month, the S&P 500 is at $250 per share. So he's able to buy 2 shares because that's just how the math works out, right? But he's still going to put $500 the second month, even if that asset price right here jumps or fluctuates. So if it goes up, he's going to buy less. And if it goes down, he's going to buy more. So as you can see in month 2, it fluctuates to month all the way up to $500. So he only gets 1 share. Then in month 3, it goes back down to 400. So he gets a 1.25 share there. So a total of 4.25. And his average price is actually below the market, which is tremendous. And that's kind of where I talk about the power of dollar cost averaging in this type of example. I'm trying to hit the next. Oh, there we go. It's down here. There we go. Okay. All right. So this is a good graph, and as you guys can probably see some of these names right here, from Calvin Coolidge all the way down here, all the way up to President Obama and Trump up here, and you can see how the S&P was invested throughout this time. So if you looked at this chart, you'd be like, hey, no president really stands out too much. Down here is the Great Depression, the 20s and 30s right here, and then all the way up to current day in 2019 right here. And as you can see, there's, from a wide perspective, it doesn't really look like there's many dips, right? It's just kind of generally trending up. And so when it comes to dollar cost averaging, the only thing that has to be true is the asset price has to continually rise over time. And so that's what this is right here. Through all these different times, like I think this is 08 right here. You see 08 drop right here. That was 12 years ago at this point. It's not showing you 2020, but as you can see, guys, the asset prices go up over time. All of these crazy news stories that you're going to see in the news nonstop, don't worry about it, right? And this is this is a more detailed example. So, we see up and down fluctuations all day long, but over the long term, it's going up. So this is a more a condensed version of that same chart we just looked at, showing different things like the US dollar shock right here, the oil crisis, the bond shock, the 87 crash. And so as you can see, there are going to be dips, and there's going to be times where that happens, and that's okay. If you're invested into, let's say, the S&P 500 here, and it dips, it's not a big deal, because if you dollar cost average during that, you're going to be making money during that time because you're going to buy more at a lower price. So they like to say buy the dip. You're essentially buying the dip automatically. So you're not really even timing it, manually timing it or anything. And then obviously this is even a more in-depth chart as well. So this is,
Hello, sorry, excuse me.
yes.
Someone's got the mic on. Can you just mute everyone? Because I believe someone's got the mic on in the background.
Yeah. You guys know how to do that?
Those dumbass people that be saying dumb shit. Instead for you to listen to your girlfriend what you have to say. You know I've been wanting to do this for not long.
Bro, people
Turn
can
your
hear you,
mics
bro.
off, folks. Turn your mics off, folks.
Do you guys know how to mute
If
everybody?
you go to where it says meeting
They hear
settings,
you,
it
nigga.
should say that.
Meeting settings. Meeting info?
And see, there's somewhere in meeting settings where it has a option for the host to mute all.
Yeah, I saw that a second ago.
I think if you click on participants, you can mute all.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there we go. All right. Sorry, guys. All right. So we're back at it. All right. So this is, guys, this is 2019 and 2020. So this is March 2020 right here. So as you see this chart get closer and, there's more to it, all of a sudden these dips seem a lot more severe. But as you saw earlier in those other charts, it's really not that significant. So when March 2020 happened, for example, I didn't do a thing different with my strategy. I didn't even read the news cycles or anything. It just kind of remained the same. Everything was kind of the same process. I didn't feel different. I didn't look at my portfolio more. I just continued to automate through dollar cost averaging, through the S&P 500 and all that stuff. So that's what I'm trying to show you guys here is the actual visuals. Because you guys, if you listen to the news is going to freak you out in every sort of way, because that's what they're geared to do, that because that's how they make their money, because it's clickbait and all that kind of stuff, right? But when it comes down to it, if that drops this much, that's just another buying opportunity, because you're going to buy more shares because of that. So flip that narrative to say my investments haven't dropped that much. It's just a good time to buy. Kind of like if you go to Target had a 50% sale, I guarantee everyone would be there, but the stock market has a 50% sale and everyone wants to sell. So think of it along the lines of that, and I think you're going to be really well off. All right, so rule of 72. So I talked about this a second ago, but this is a common rule that you guys can use and apply when you're kind of planning out investments. So the formula over here is 72 divided by your compounded annual growth return. That's just the fancy way of saying like 10% returns or 8% returns, equals your time in years for your money to double. So over here, you have an example of 9% return. So like I said, S&P has returned 10%, but we're going to use 9% for ease of math here. So if you do 72 divided by 9, every 8 years, your money's doubling. So if you had, let's say, $10,000 in a portfolio and your money doubles every 8 years, well, look how it kind of plays out now. So $10,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but this is how awesome compound interest is. So you have a 32-year investment horizon. Let's say you start when you're like mid-20s and you're going to pull it out 60 something or so. Well, if you divide that by 8 years, or right here, you're every time your money doubles, that doubles 4 times. And so with that, your money is going from 10,000 to 160,000 in a 32-year period. And something else to consider is like, that doesn't include all the money you're putting in between that time. And that's where you really make your big money is, hey, I'm putting 10,000 to begin with, but I'm going to continue to build upon that. And so that 160 is going to be way bigger, but this is just kind of an example if you just lump some 10,000 in there today. So when it comes to index investing, a lot of people are confused on the layers of it. So this is a good visual that I put together that kind of helps you kind of explain the levels of this. So when people say, hey, go invest in index funds, everyone's like, I'm not really sure what you mean. Like, where, what, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take it 4 layers right here and break it down. So brokerage is the account. So you guys have heard Vanguard, Fidelity. A lot of people use like Robinhood or, one of the companies that provides the investments and provides those accounts. So that's where it all starts at the brokerage level. Then within that brokerage level or within that company, you have to actually select an account. So that could be an IRA, a 401k, a taxable brokerage account that you're trading in or whatever it is, whatever that is. That's the account. So then within that, you have an index fund. So that's where the index, where you actually buy the index fund. So people get in the IRA and 401k and they think that's the investment. That is not the investment. You have to actually select within, hey, I want to do index funds or I want to do mutual funds or individual stocks. And that's where this comes into play. So like I was saying, the S&P 500's the largest 500 US companies at any given time. So there's constant competition, which I love. Tesla just entered in December 21st. So if you own the S&P 500, you own Tesla. They unfortunately didn't make the list here, but and then this is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You can buy numerous index and ETFs, but this is just an example here. So then within those index funds are the actual stocks themselves. So if you buy the S&P 500, you're buying all of these. So you own Netflix, P&G, McDonald's, Amazon, Facebook. And so that's why I kind of stress the S&P 500 so much, or something like VT Sachs or VFX, because this stuff is so, readily available to us to be owners of. And it's just that simple when it comes down to it. I think the biggest problem is people don't understand that you actually do own these stocks within, one simple fund. So you might just buy one fund, but you actually own all of these, at a fractional level, but still you own all of them. All right. So I'm a big Ramsey fan. If you guys have heard of Dave Ramsey, I really like what he has to say a lot of times. So here's a good quote by him. So money is 80% behavior, 20% head knowledge, and it's not what you do. It's what you do. It's not what you know. And so I like to talk about this a lot, guys, because a lot of people come from a mindset of thinking, hey, I don't know what you're saying. Like you might talk to a professional and you're like, this stuff's way too complicated. This stuff's way too hard. But I can tell you with, my book in particular, or, somebody's resource out there, Chris's courses, any of those types of things, you can learn this stuff. This stuff is not rocket science. And it is very readily, accessible to you guys via the internet or whatever. So take advantage of it. And I know you guys can do it, but what it comes down to is really that behavior. So kind of like what we talked about earlier was these index funds, right? So here's an example. So VTWAX. So this is the ticker symbol. So if you were searching for this index fund, you just type in VTWAX and you'd find it. So this is a way to buy the whole world. This is a Vanguard fund. It's the total world stock index Admiral shares. The expense ratio is really low that we talked about, 10 basis points or 0.10%. And the number of stocks, you're going to own 8,800 stocks throughout the entire world just by owning this. So, when it comes to diversification, you own the entire world, whether that be stocks, bonds, and how you want to diversify. This is already an awesome way to do so. Same with here, the U.S. stock market. So VT Sachs. At Fidelity, it's FSCAC. So these tickers are going to change, but they're still the same core investment that you're holding as the U.S. stock market. So it's simple stuff like this, guys, that you can literally buy one of these funds and own the entire U.S. stock market tomorrow. So this is a really cool study that kind of furthers my point as well. Is Fidelity did a study from 2003 to 2013. They conducted that the best investors at their place were dead and inactive people. So what does that tell me? That simply tells me, hey, if you don't do anything and you just kind of put your money in there, you're going to do pretty well. You don't have to be a stock market genius. You don't have to go to school for this. You don't have to be a CPA or CFA. And the average person usually does better than some of the professionals out there, to be honest. So the individual stock investing rule. So people always want to get into the individual stock. So here's my take on this. If your portfolio is, let's say, 100,000, never own more than 10% of that. So I like to say this rule is in place because of two reasons. One, because
I don't want to be mean to you, but listen, I'm gonna make dinner and I'm gonna make you breakfast in the morning, okay? So just stop. I'm doing a lot, okay?
so guys, when you guys are looking at this individual
What's your
stock
time?
investing rule,
Finish the bed, make the bed. You listening?
Someone
And
mute the
I
mic,
please,
please.
you just keep
Someone's
up.
got
yeah, sorry, I muted them. So when it comes to the individual stock investing rule, guys, I always like to say this 10% simply because emotion gets in the way of a good investor. And so when you own something over 10%, let's say you own Tesla, one of the hot stocks right now, Plug, something like that, and you get really attached to it, you typically don't make good decisions when it comes to the market because you're using your emotion, whether you like it or not. We're all human. It's just part of us, right? So to understand that that's part of us, that's a big thing when it comes to this. Also, if that stock does collapse, well, you have 90% of your assets elsewhere, so you don't have to be freaked out if 10% goes by the wayside. You're still okay. So that's kind of my individual stock investing rule. I have nothing against individual stocks. I think they're an awesome way to invest, but I would be careful with over investing in one stock. So here is a good portfolio composition quiz based on what we were talking about. So Denise and Oscar, we have them back here. They have a Vanguard IRA.
What's up, bro?
They have, the same investments, but they have different allocations. So based on what we've been talking about, what exactly here would be the best option, right? When it comes to who did it right. So you see Denise over here, she had way too much in this portfolio with Apple. So she bought 20% Apple. So let's say she had $100,000 portfolio, 20,000 of that was Apple. Yeah, that's a good blue chip company. I feel confident myself in it. But if something happens for whatever reason, let's say a fraud allegation comes out, there's insider trading, an Enron type of deal. It doesn't matter who you are, what company you are, how great you are, you always can fall. So having 20% here is really risky. Whereas Oscar here owns, he owns the S&P 500 through VFX. He owns VTX, which is the International Index Fund, a great one to be in. And then he only owns 5% of Apple. So with this, he's obviously the winner as far as the portfolio composition based on the 10% rule. But that's a really good thing to look into. And then the last slide I have for you guys before I open it for Q&A is this really cool $1 million bet that Warren Buffett had. So in 2008, he bet that including fees, costs, and expenses, that the S&P 500 fund, VFX as we talked about, or FXAIX, or at Schwab, it's SWPPX, would outperform hand-picked portfolio of hedge funds over 10 years. This bet pit two basic investing philosophies against each other: the passive strategy, which is right here in the blue, versus the active, which is somebody that's buying and trading and selling all the time. And that's what this hedge fund, the purple funds are, fund A, B through E. And then this is the hedge fund average. So he obviously won this bet. And a lot of people still disregard this bet and they think it doesn't matter what he said. Going forward, it's going to be different. But all I'm going to say is history does not really lie. And it tells us, it might not repeat itself, but it does rhyme in some sort of fashion. And ever since I got into the investing game on a personal level, I've seen 17% returns in the S&P 500. So that makes me feel confident going forward. Vanguard did a study saying international might outperform domestic if you are from the US in the next 10 years, but no one really truly knows. So I'm going to put my money where history lies, where my education lies, and stuff like that. So that's kind of my presentation. I hope I didn't go too long. I want to leave you guys with a little Dwight. So if you guys watch The Office, I'm a big Office fan. So you can do it if you believe, false. You can do it if you do it. So a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people want to do it. But the point I'm trying to drive home is if you guys just open an account, buy an VFX or FXAIX and just start, you're going to be able to do it big time and have huge returns something that a lot of people sit on for years and think about and ponder what's the best strategy. Just do it, and you're going to be really, really successful. So that is my slideshow, guys, for you. I wanted to keep it pretty quick and to the point, but I want to open it up to you guys for questions. I think I might have to unmute you guys, but I will open it up for questions. So feel free to shoot them at me.
I have a question. I was wondering if you can go over real quick index funds versus ETFs.
Yes, a great question. Okay, so ETFs and index funds, I talked about index funds a lot, but I love ETFs too, and they're very similar in nature. So we talked about the S&P 500 a lot. The index fund version of that would be VFX. The ETF version would be VOO. You guys probably have heard this, the spider funds and all that stuff, VOO. And so the only difference with those is how they're treated from a tax perspective. But the actual core investment is the exact same. So if you own VOO or you own VFX, you literally own the S&P 500, but how you can actually maneuver with that is the difference. So with an ETF, you can trade it like a stock. So let's say at 12 o'clock on a Monday, you're like, hey, I want to trade my S&P 500 fund or sell some shares at 12 o'clock. Well, you can do that with an ETF. With an index fund, you have to wait until like market close and whatever the price is that day. So if you want to sell at 12, well, the market price might be something, but it might fluctuate between the next couple hours, and that would be the price. So that's really the main difference when it comes to index funds and ETFs, which is why I recommend both. I think it's more investor preference.
Hey, I have a quick question.
Yep.
Okay, so just to reiterate, so essentially I can just open up a Roth IRA. I guess the main thing and then buy the index funds, but I guess the main thing that I just get caught up on is like how many index funds I can buy under that Roth. Like, do I have to have several Roths or several different type of IRAs? And I'm actually learning at the same time because I work for T. Rowe Price as well. And I'm working like hands-on with a lot of this stuff, but ultimately I just get a little bit hung up on that because I have some money that I'm like ready to throw in to an account, but I do see like minimum investments with certain funds or like certain vehicles and stuff like that. So again, I have my list and I have like all of, the VOO and VTSAX and all of that stuff, but I just get a little bit confused sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes down to it, a lot of like Vanguard, for example, they do have that minimum investment of $3,000. So if you want to open a S&P 500 fund, you do have to put forward $3,000. But if you do the VOO, if you do like the ETF instead, the ETF version, you can actually just buy it whenever. So that's one of the things about ETFs and index funds as well. But once you get that $3,000 set, you can buy as little or as much as you want throughout the rest of the time. It doesn't really matter. So you can buy $10 worth or $300 worth whenever. When it comes to invest or types, I guess, number of Roths, I'm trying to remind myself in all these questions. So the number of Roths, you really can, technically you would open one per person, and that would be a $6,000 limit that you have to invest per year. So with 2020, that's the limit in 2021, but the US government kind of changes that from time to time, and those limits slowly go up with inflation. So let's say you want to max out a Roth and you want to do an index fund. Well, however many index funds you want, totally up to you. And that's investor preference as well. I will tell you, there's a lot of correlation and overlap with like VTSAX and VFX, because I guess the fundamental, thing that you're buying is a bunch of stocks, right? So if you buy a bunch of stocks in the S&P 500 and then you turn around and go buy the VTSAX, which is the total US stock market, well, the S&P 500 makes up a huge portion of the total US stock market. So you're technically not really getting additional cover. You're getting small cap and mid cap with that VTSAX, but I want to say it's the correlation's like 95%, because the US S&P 500 makes up like 85% of the stock market as is. So when it comes to number of index funds, it doesn't matter necessarily how many you have. I think you want to start with the idea of, hey, what do I want coverage on? Do I want international? Do I want tech? Do I want healthcare? Do I want cannabis? Whatever you want to go, whichever route you want to take, kind of set that up in an allocation percentage wise, and then go find those ETFs and index funds that kind of align with that thinking. And it's typically pretty straightforward when it comes to finding the index fund that fits like the tech sectors. For example, like Vanguard has a really cool fund, VGT. So that's an ETF, a tech sector ETF that has done incredible. And I think it's only a 0.10 expense ratio. So I think setting it up like that, you open that Roth IRA, you have one account, and you have $6,000 throughout the year to max. Set that, max it, and then just figure out which allocations you want best. It's hard to say like any given investor has to do one way or the other, because everyone's different. Everyone's in different age groups and stuff like that. So there's different things that are at play. But in general, if you go with a VT Sax or a VFX, you're going to be fine long term. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it answered it perfectly, because I definitely was just getting hung up on like, okay, because it's so many, I was just like, how many do I have to buy under this one vehicle? Like, and
Yep.
it's ultimately like, you want to cover up so much land, but I don't want to double it up.
Yeah, for sure. I think honestly, like there's really professional portfolios out there like called the 2-fund portfolio, lazy portfolio. So like if you have 2 funds, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, because think if you own the VT Wax, which we talked about, that has 8,800 stocks. So if you owned 8,800 stocks, would you say you're not diversified? I think you probably would. You'd probably say you have too many. So if you own like one index fund, but it covers 8,800 stocks, that's kind of what I'm saying is where you're probably diversified enough in that investment. So it comes down to kind of what coverage you want. If it's international, sector specific, all that kind of stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Oh,
I have a question. Oh,
Yep.
sorry.
So I just got a quick question about the ETFs and or I guess more so index versus like dividend stocks. Is there such thing as like a dividend ETF or an index dividend like pool? Because I know not everything that's in the index, right, is going to also be like dividend paying stocks. So I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are. So the quick answer is yes, there is. So if you're like a big dividend stock guy and you're like, hey, I want to get some dividend stocks, there are specific ones that are dividend high paying yield, dividend high yield ETFs. So for example, at Vanguard, there's something called VYM. So that's a dividend high yield or high yield dividend paying ETF that you can buy. So the yield on that, I don't know what it is currently, but you can check on that. But that's basically a way to say, hey, I want to focus on dividends, which is a huge thing in the investing world, but I don't want to pick one individual company. I just want to kind of diversify and have broad exposure into that. Well, you can get a bunch of good quality paying dividend companies in one big pot that's paying you out a specific yield per month, or sorry, per quarter or something, and do it that way. So yeah, that's a really good question. There's so many different options. VYM is the one that comes to mind because the expense ratio is low, and that's probably my favorite one. I'm trying to think. I think it's VDHY or VHYLX maybe, and don't quote me on that, but you can probably Google like whatever broker you're at. Like let's say Vanguard. I like to use that as my example. Vanguard high dividend ETF or Vanguard high dividend index fund, and you'll be able to find that really easily.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Question. So what investment method would you give for a person that's over 30 and trying to catch up on their retirement? Would you say still invest in index funds or go more to ETFs, or make it a mix of index funds, ETFs, and regular stocks?
That's a great question. And honestly, 30 years old is really young. Like, even if you haven't started saving for retirement, like that would light me up if somebody came to me. I work with clients a lot, one-on-ones, and they come to me and think they're way too behind. And I tell them, I assure them, like, guys, you have 20, 30 years till retirement. Like, what you could do with that money in the meantime is huge. And like we went back to the wealth triangle, like the time is huge, the amount invested is huge, and the asset percent return. So to answer your question, I think index funds are still fine at that point. But I think it comes down to the investor preference. Like, this is one strategy of many that I'm preaching to you guys about tonight. Like, some people like the individual stock way and some people like the ETF way. I know people that have VOO, and I have VFX, and they say they would rather have VOO. And it's like, they technically own the same thing as I do. But so it really comes down to that. I think that if you're 30 years old or whatever, or, you know, mid 30s, and you had maybe 80% in a broad diversified VT Sachs or VFX, you know, total US stock market or S&P 500, then maybe 10% in VGT or something higher, like a tech sector ETF, and then maybe an individual stock, maybe Apple or a big blue chip that might grow a little more, even like a Tesla. I'd have no problem with that. I would just stick to that 10% investing rule with the individual stock.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
Hi, I have a quick question for you.
401k. Hello? Hello?
Go for it.
Yeah, I have a 401k that I have from a job that I'm no longer working with. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on moving it into a brokerage account.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you have old money sitting in money sitting in an old 401k right now?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do here is what's called a rollover. So probably your best bet here to avoid taxes. And it depends what your strategy is here ultimately, but like the quick, easy, dirty way is just to roll it into your new 401k, wherever you currently are. That's going to likely avoid taxes, because I'm assuming you're going to go from the same type of 401k to this, from the old to the new, unless you change from traditional to Roth. But as long as you stay in the same type of 401k, you will be fine from a tax perspective, and that money will just get rolled over. You'll fill out forms on both ends, and they'll just transfer it over. The other route that I think is probably the best way is the IRA. So if you don't have an IRA, you can still do a rollover IRA. So you take that money from the old 401k and just transfer into what's called a rollover IRA with like Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, and just roll it there, and then have better investment options, lower fees typically, because 401ks are sometimes not the best. Just depends where you're at. And I would do it that way. But as far as the brokerage account, the only reason I wouldn't do that is because you're taking your money out of the 401k, which would actually be penalized. And that's kind of the biggest issue I have with it. It's not just tax, it's actually penalized because you're withdrawing it early from retirement technically and putting it into a brokerage. So I would probably stick with the 401k or IRA route.
Okay. And the other question I had was, what's the expense ratio that you typically like to see?
Yeah, I like to see ideally under 10% or 0.10, which is 10 basis points. I would never go higher than 0.2%, which is 20 basis points. And I would ideally love to see free to 0.04, which, you know, FZ rocks, like I said, at Fidelity. I think that's the total stock market. That's 0. VFX at Vanguard, the S&P 500 is 0.04%. One thing you guys should note is there's something called, there's different like tiers, I guess you could say. So if you start at like a Vanguard or something, they put you in like what's called the investor shares up till $10,000. And so your fees are slightly higher up until that point. But once you have $10,000, they actually upgrade your tier structure to what's called Admiral shares. So is one of the slides I talked about Vanguard Total World Stock Market Admiral shares. So your expense ratio actually goes down at that point. Like if you buy it's VFINX.
Like really low. What the fuck?
So at that point, you drop from like 0.14, like 14 basis points to like 4 basis points. So that's a really good way to understand, like, hey, if I get into a fund that's a little higher early on, it's okay because I know, going forward, it's going to drop. Just to understand the investor versus admiral share class, and they might have different terms, different brokerage firms, but that's pretty general across the industry.
Thank you.
Last person.
Yep.
Hey, how do you start a Roth IRA for your kid?
Yeah, that's awesome that you're thinking about that. So the Roth IRA for your kid, they have to have taxable income. So if you have a kid, let's say they're like 2, well, you can't file unless you're doing child slave labor slave labor at your house somehow. It's pretty hard to file taxes on a 2-year-old and say they did legitimate income. But if they get older and, like, let's say 10 years old or something like that, and they're shoveling snow or cutting grass or working somewhere that they're kind of getting paid under the table, technically you can technically pay taxes on that to the government through like a CPA or whatever, and then you can go ahead and invest in a Roth IRA up to that amount. So if they make $3,000 in a summer, working at a Kool-Aid stand or something like that, like you can actually invest $3,000 into there for them. And if you start that at like 14 years old, by like 30, if they invest a lot during that time, they're going to be like millionaires pretty fast. Because 14 years old is ridiculously low to start investments for kids, but it's highly recommended at the same time.
Yeah, my son. People recommended like starting an LLC and kind of like paying your kid, or I don't know. You probably can't recommend that.
Yep, that's a good point you make. So if you have a company, which is what they're saying, an LLC is actually the legal structure behind a company. But if you have like a sole proprietorship or something like that, and you hire your kid, there's a way to like write off the child expense and put it into it, but I'm not entirely sure on the details behind that, but there is something along the lines of that. I'd have to get back. If you DM me, I can figure out the details for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think about buying silver right now as far as like an ETF or a...
Yeah. Commodities in general are, I mean, they all have I think that commodities, they don't have a place in my portfolio personally, but it depends what you're trying to achieve. Like the all-weather portfolio ran by Ray Dalio, who's like a huge hedge fund investor. He ran Bridgewater Associates. He has like 15% of commodities in his portfolio and like 55% bonds. And then I think the rest of it's stock. And a lot of people think that's wildly high for like commodities and bonds, but what he's trying to do, he has a different goal than just maximizing and making the most money. His goal is actually to preserve his money and to have the allocation of risk versus allocation of capital. So he's not focused on, hey, I'm going to beat the market every year by 2% and make 12% on my money. I just want to make sure when there's a drawdown like 08, like when the market collapses, or March 2020, I have a really minimal impact on my portfolio. So his portfolio has returned 8%, and it's actually only drawn down when the S&P's drawn down, I think like up to 40% over time. I think only 6% he's maxed out at. So he's only lost like 6% of his portfolio value at any given time, because he has those commodities in it. So I think they have a place. It just depends where you're at in the game. Like if you're a young investor trying to like maximize like for like long-term gains, I don't really think they have a place. But if you're like closer to retirement, or there's like something where you're trying to like preserve that money, I think it makes sense to maybe add commodities or bonds to the portfolio mix at that point.
Okay.
I have a question. Okay, so if you've been, hello?
Yeah.
Yes. So if you've been saving money in a savings account for like yourself as well as your children, but now you're interested in opening like a Roth IRA for, all of us, like, are you able to, like, if it's over the amount, like you said, how it's 6,000 for the year, like if you're over that amount, are you able to like add in additional if you can like show the income for like previous years?
No, it's a per year basis. There is
Okay.
what's called a catch up contribution. So if you're over 50 years old, there's a catch up contribution of $1,000 in the Roth IRA, and the 401k. There's actually it's a $6,000 or $6,500 extra max. So 401k limits 19.5 as of 2021, and so you can actually put 25,000 if you're like 50 and over. So that's the only way you can catch up, but the limits are per year, and so it kind of ignores like anything in the past.
Okay, and are we past the point for the 2020 contribution?
No, we actually aren't. So up until you file your taxes April 15th, you're able to actually allocate that money that you're investing for 2020. So a lot of people have been doing this, and if they were behind or like, something happened where they couldn't invest, well, for the next couple months, you can actually put it into 2020 and then start your 2021 contributions after that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One more quick question. You talked about rolling over your 401k into a Roth from like a previous job. Is that something that you have to like reach out to your other job about, or is there a way you can just do it yourself?
Yeah, typically you can actually, I think there's like, from the technical perspective, like I think if you reach out to your current employer and say, hey, I want to do a rollover, and then talk to the broker firm that you want to work with, they should be able to withdraw that money as long as you have access to the account online, because they'll just need some details. But I don't think you actually have to contact your employer as long as you have those login details and have like the details behind that account.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
When
you're saying to invest for
the Roth IRA you were talking about for a child, does that provide an advantage over doing the UTMA or UGMA typical custodial account if
That's
you're able
awesome.
to do that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not really. It's more from a, I guess, legal perspective and like figuring out like where that money is going to go. So like with the UTMA and UGMA, I love those accounts, but the problem is and a lot of parents have this issue is like at 18 years old, if you don't want to give that money to your kid, you have to. And whereas like other accounts, you don't necessarily have to. And like what's crazy about it, so my uncle actually had one for his daughter, and his daughter's like 16 years old, and she kind of went like, she like doesn't live at home. The parents were divorced, so like she was kind of just went off the deep end. But he has to give that money to her at 18 years old. So it doesn't matter what what his beliefs are. That money is hers. It's her assets at 18 years old. So I think that's more of the thing that you need to be aware of is like, is my kid, like we all hope our kid's going to grow up to be good.
Yeah,
But like,
I feel you.
let's be honest, like we don't always get the control of that.
Yeah. So is there an alternative to that though? Because I mean, my other concern with those was that it's factored into their federal grant money, so that could cause a problem
Yeah,
with that too.
from a tax strategy as well. So like there's like the 529, and I might have this backwards, but the 529 goes against your like if you're trying to file a FAFSA with college, like the 529 goes against the parents' assets, but like so you get less college aid. But the thing is, if you do the UTMA, it's the child's asset, so it doesn't go against the parents, and therefore you might get more FAFSA as well. And that's a huge hack as well. And I'm pretty sure I have that right, but double check me after this call.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
I have a question in regards to the children's Roth IRA account. Are those two accounts you were just referring to, are those the same as having a custodial IRA account?
They're slightly different, but they have the same purpose. So like the custodial, Roth IRA, you can open that in anyone's name technically. And that's going to grow with time, with whatever you want to invest in. But the UTMA and UGMA have slightly different rules around it. And really the only thing is like I think it's the UTMA is like there's only securities that you can actually invest in. Whereas like the UGMA could be like, it's a gift to Minors Act. You can like, if you have like paintings or like land or real estate, you can also transfer it to them as well through that. Whereas like the Roth IRA is just securities, which is like stocks and bonds and stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We have about 5 more minutes, guys. So whatever you guys want to throw my way, I'm here to answer.
I have a question about taxes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if I can open up a trust fund, and put all my assets in there. Would that help with like tax breaks and everything? Because I'm looking to, lower my taxes.
Yeah, I get you. I'm not actually a tax specialist, so I don't want to lie about this by any means or act like I know. But I'm pretty sure if you put it, you can. There's ways to allocate the assets, and there's different strategies to do that. So, are you trying to take your assets that you currently own and put those elsewhere?
Yes.
So there's actually a really good way to do this is you can actually gift tax-free to your children up to, I think it's $15,000 per person in 2020. These limits always are changing. So, and I'm not a tax specialist, so I don't always remember, but I think it's 15,000 per spouse. If you're married, you can do 30,000 and gift per year. So there's a way to get around that by kind of shoveling off your assets through time to your children. And on the gifter side, you don't pay any tax either. So that could be a really good strategy, like the gift tax exclusion. But I'm not
I
sure.
don't have children, that's why. So just my personal, assets. I mean, it'll be good for them later on. That's why I was like, I wanted to set this up now. Like when I do, get married and have children, I want that to already be set up.
Mhm.
But for now, I was thinking about like putting a trust and all that in there. And I think that I'm not seeing somewhere that it's good for like tax breaks, but I wanted to know like how much is advantage of it instead of me open up and like putting everything through a business instead of like writing off everything on my taxes and just putting everything within a trust.
Your trust, yeah. I wish I knew that more in detail. I don't specialize in the taxes of the problem, so I don't want to mislead you or anything. If you DM me, I'm gonna research this question for you, and I'll get you an answer.
Okay,
Hey, I have
thank
a
you.
question.
Yep.
I got a question. Hey, how could you transfer over your whole portfolio, all of the stocks, to an LLC? And do you recommend that? From a personal portfolio, do you recommend transferring them over to an LLC for more write-off purposes?
It's a. I would say my gut instinct or my default answer is going to say talk to a CPA because if I just blindly say yes, that makes sense. Or it's hard to know without seeing your whole picture. But I would pay for a consultation with a CPA and sit down with them and show them your assets in the business and in your personal life and see what makes most sense because there's just no quick answer to that, to be honest.
Well, I mean, does it even matter if the business is, successful or anything like that? I mean, can't you just?
I mean, yeah, you could transfer. You can likely transfer them over. The problem is if it depends like the income and the write-offs and all that stuff that are associated with that business. So if you and it has to be an actual like the business has to be operating. So if you say it's like failing, are you running this business currently, or are you just kind of throwing some assets over there and like LLC in it?
Yeah, that's what I'd be trying to do. I don't have a business running currently, no.
Gotcha. Yeah. To be honest, it's just too tough to give you a direct answer on that. I would say yes, you can move it over, and it may make sense, but I'd have to see your entire picture. It's like saying like, hey, is 20% to my mortgage okay? Well, yeah, probably. But the problem is, what if you're spending 25% in your car? Well, then we got to realign some things. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with that.
Okay.
But yeah, I would highly recommend you guys to talk to the CPA. CPAs are awesome, and you might pay a little fee up front, but I can guarantee they'll save you some money in the long run.
How do you, sorry, and I have another question whenever.
Yep, go ahead.
How do you trade as an LLC? Like how do you say that like that's your job?
Oh, like how do you put that into your like being self-employed?
Right, unless like it's better to just create a company and trade from that company's LLC, or like what's your recommendation on that?
Yeah. So again, business law is really not my strong suit by any means. I think I took like 2 classes in college on this. I'm going through the process right now of getting my LLC myself, and because I'm going to be self-employed here soon. So like, I don't know what makes most sense, to be honest, from if the LLC, if that makes more sense to trade from. But that's really, the LLC is really just a legal structure, and that's just protection behind that. So like, the business itself is going to run as probably a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an S corp, or a C corp, or typically the 4 legal structures that a business owner is going to use. And so based on that, it depends what that is, and then what the ultimate like income is, what kind of assets you're trading. Are you trading or are you investing, type of thing. So I would say, to keep things simple, I would probably just keep it on the personal level. But if you have a huge business, like colleges do this all the time, and like, I do audit for a living, so I audit like the financial statements, and we have some clients that will take their assets and they'll invest those assets, and it makes sense because like the college and institutions, like, that makes sense because they're a growing great worth, but with net worth and stuff. But like, when you keep it on a smaller business scale, it just doesn't always make sense. But again, I would talk to a CPA and make sure that makes sense. And maybe even a lawyer would come into play. And I have some good contacts. If you guys need anybody, I can direct you right to them, because I'm working with them currently myself.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the reason I was asking is I heard that you could claim like more than just 3K of losses if it's like through an LLC.
Oh yeah. There's rules behind that as well. Whereas like the individual can claim up to 3K losses of capital loss against the gains, offset them against the gains. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely, you're onto the right path right there. I would definitely consult, but I think you're thinking along the right lines.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep.
I wanted to know, like, so I have like a 401k that was left over from a previous job, and it's already like with Fidelity. And I know that you talked about like the possibility of doing a rollover into a new 401k, but like, would that be suggested if it's already like with one of the companies that you mentioned?
Yes. The reason being is because you have more control. Simply, old companies, they can pick up. So I talk about fees a lot on my page and stuff, and fees will eat into it. And so there's different things that I actually audited some 401k plans, and there was just old 401k plans sitting, or people's accounts sitting there that haven't been touched, and they started picking up fees that they otherwise would not if they still work there. So I would absolutely move it over. One, because you control it entirely. There's probably less fees, and there's probably better investment options, to be honest, in like the open market versus 401k to begin with. Even if it is with like Fidelity or Charles Schwab.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
I have a question. I heard some people earlier talking about having IRAs for their children. Does this hold if your child has a disability? I feel like I've read that they can't have any type of money under their name. But I just want to be sure. My daughter's 2 right now, but she has Down syndrome. So thinking ahead in the future, I'm not sure if I can open something like that under her name or how it would work.
Yeah, so it actually matters if they work. So it's taxable income it's built off of. So in her situation, it just depends if she's able to work and make some sort of income. It doesn't matter what that is. Whatever she's able to do, as long as there's a W-2 that's bringing income of some sort in, she can definitely do that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. All right, guys, I'm going to take about 1 to 2 more questions. We're 9:30.
I
Go
just have
ahead.
one quick question. When it comes to like the Vanguard like accounts and stuff, are you actually individually like controlling it, or is it someone behind the scenes controlling it for you?
Yeah, you're entirely in control. The assets you buy obviously are like companies technically, right? So like the company, you have no really true control over that. But like as far as what goes into your account, you're in total control.
Okay, so you would make the decisions to sell or just buy more.
Right. Unless you hire a financial advisor, which I don't think you really need. But yeah, you would be in control.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, I may have missed this question, answered this question, or if you said it earlier, but at what age can you open a Roth IRA for your kids?
At any age that they have taxable income.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, really quick, just to follow up on that. If they don't have taxable income, are you able to just open a brokerage account for them and invest into an ETF?
Yeah, so you can do it on your end. You can actually open one for yourself and then gift them in the future, but they can't open them until they're 18.
Got it. Thanks.
Oh, I got another question. I heard, I guess, because I don't know if this is true, that you don't have to report up to like a certain amount of wages, and I'm assuming it's like 3,000 or something like that. As far as like file taxes, you don't have to file taxes. Does that count for kids in this instance?
Are you referring to like the kiddie tax?
I don't know what I'm referring to. Honestly, this is just like something that I heard through somewhere, that like up to a certain amount of income, you don't have to file for it if it's like super low.
I can tell you that the government's not going to come after you if you don't report taxes technically, but the problem is if you're trying to make like invest or like let's say open a kids account, like there's not really a way around that technically. They do have to see that. So I haven't really directly heard along the lines of that though.
Okay, so yeah, I mean I don't know. Okay, so if you open a Roth IRA, something has to be reported.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that sucks.
I wish there was ways around that.
Okay. We got to come up with them.
I know. I'll scheme. I'll get game plan around that. I promise.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yep. All right, guys. Awesome time tonight. If you guys have any other questions, definitely reach out to me. You can reach out to me in the Wealth Squad. You can reach out to me on my IG and Twitter, which is BudgetDog. But other than that, I'm gonna figure out how not to mess this up and make sure this is recorded so that this is actually in our Wealth Squad Discord chat. So thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it, and reach out if you guys have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you.